Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be building another planter. Now this planter, I'm going to just make it more squared off and a little bit easier than the last one. The last one was pretty simple, but we're going to try to simplify this. So if you don't have all the tools you need and you don't want to do complicated angles, we can still get you a nice looking planter at a lower cost without having to have a bunch of complicated cuts and stuff in it. So here's my cut list. Basically we're going to just do a square. We're going to use a couple pieces of trim to cover the outside edges. So we want these to be pretty close, but we don't want them to be, we don't need them to be 100% perfect in this case. I'm gonna try to make them close as I can. You should also, but if for some reason you're off a little bit on the ends, that won't matter. So my front and my back are gonna be wider than my sides. So this is a picture of my side. So the side's gonna be 13 inches. Now my boards are 1/2 inch thick. So to cover the other side, when the boards come out this way, I need to make the other side 14 inches. That's a 1/2 inch for this side, 1/2 inch for this side. And that way the board comes edge to edge and you don't see any gap, or you don't have a gap in the corner. So again, there's my cut list. Now I'm not going to cut my top, my finished trim piece yet until I get my box done, because this may change a little bit. If I'm off a little bit here and there, we'll cut the top piece first. But we're going to go ahead and cut our side panels, our legs, the cleat that's going to hold the bottom piece in, and the trim pieces for the face of it to cover up the corners and stuff like that. I'm going to be using deck screws, wood screws, and probably some brad nails. Mine are going to go on a covered porch, so if you're putting yours out in the weather, make sure everything you use is weatherproof. I'm not necessarily, if you see me use something that's not weatherproof, again, mine's going to be on a covered porch, not out in the exposed elements. But if you're using yours out in the exposed elements, make sure you use the appropriate hardware, or it's going to rust and rot and fall apart. So I'm using fence pickets here. Now my fence pickets are cleaned up already. I'm not going to make you watch me sand those. I actually stuck mine in the planer. These come at like a 5/8 inch thickness to start with. I've planed them down to 1/2 inch, or right a little bit above 1/2 inch, just so they look cleaner and better. You don't have to plane yours. You can finish them however you want. You can leave them fuzzy. You can plane them down to they're smooth. You can sand them. Whatever you want to do to them, it's your project. You do it the way you want to. So the first thing I want to do is I want to cut my panels. So I'm going to cut these panels. It's hard to do this with one hand. I'm going to cut my panels over here. So I'm going to cut 6 panels at 13 inches. And 6 panels of 14 inches out of this material. So I'm going to take my square and I'm going to make me So I'm going to take the board and I'm going to measure off the length I need. So I'm going to do 14 inches. I'm going to do my front panels first. Once I get this set to 14 inches, I'm going to mark it. I've created a cleat on the side here. So once I get my board lined up, all I have to do is slide it down till it touches and then cut the boards off, and repeat that over and over. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I've got my cleat, or my stop, attached to my fence, so I can slide my fence back and forth. I'll take my line and line it up. Now this is easier if you're not trying to work around the camera. Once I get my line where I want, I'm just going to take the saw and push down a little bit of pressure. I'm going to slide my board over till it touches. Make any minor adjustments, like I still bumped it in a little bit. Once I get it where I want, I'm going to tighten my fence down so my fence doesn't move. So every time I make this cut now, I slide the board forward, make the cut, slide the board forward, make the cut. And once you get your 6/14s or 13s, vice versa, do the other one. So over here, I've got my 12 boards. I've got 6/14, 6/13. The next thing I want to do is I want to cut my legs. So my legs I want to be 1.5 inches square. So 2x4, 2x6, 2x8 are all 1.5 inches wide. I've got a 2x8 left over here from another job, so I'm going to use it. If you need to use a 2x4, use a 2x4. Just try to find one that's pretty straight. They don't have to be perfectly straight, because you're going to cover this with planks and trim, so you won't actually see this, but this is going to support your structure. So you want to try to find a board that's not super warped, as you know, if you can. Now since I'm using a 2x8, I can actually get all my legs out of one piece of board. So I'm just going to cut this one time at 16 inches. Now this will do 2 things for you. This will save you on wood, if you can buy bigger pieces of wood and cut them down. Saves you money. It also will keep your legs even, because you're only cutting one time. You're not having a bunch of cuts, and you're less likely to be off a little bit on one end or the other. What I do want to do is cut this rough end off the end here, because this one's really fuzzy. So I'm going to make sure I get a nice even cut on the end that I'm starting with. I got a nice clean board. Measure out my 16 inches because that's what I want my legs to be. Again, you make your legs however long you want. 16 seems to be a good number for me. So I'm getting ready to cut my trim pieces. Now we're going to do the trim pieces the same way as we did the other ones. We're going to put a cleat up here. We're going to set this to 16 inches. The thing to remember on this is you don't need, we need 8 total pieces, but you don't need to cut 8 boards because they're only going to be 2 inches wide. Okay, so I'm going to set this up again now to cut our trim pieces. This is going to go down the face of our planter so it looks better. We're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to set up our fence over here so we can cut 16 inches off of these. We need 8. We need 2 for each face of it, basically. What you have to remember though is we're going to cut these down to 2 inches a piece, so we only need to cut 4 of these planks at 16 inches. Now you can do this 2 different ways this time. Since we've already cut our legs at 16, you can lay our legs up there and just start chopping them off. So we know our legs 16 inches. Slide our board up against there, slide this down, and start cutting them this way against our legs. You can still lose an 1/8 or a 16th or a 32nd each time you do that. So I'm going to go back to my stop block. I'm going to set my stop block back up, and I'm going to cut off 4 more boards at 16 inches. Now again, this is just the trim piece for the front. The 2x4, 2x6, whatever you're using, is actually going to support the planter. So when we cut these off, when we go to put them on, we may have to nip just a little bit off because we don't want these hitting the ground before our legs. We want them to be as close as we can possibly without seeing the legs sticking underneath of it, because this is going to supposed to be what you see. It looks like the planter sitting on and not the actual weight of the 2x4s. So again, I'm going to cut 4 of these. So we've got our boards cut to length. The only thing we haven't done is the cleat and the top piece. We're going to do that last, or next to last with each other. You get the idea. We've got to rip these pieces down to fit. So our side panels are going to be 5 inches tall each. So I need to take these, run them down to 5 inches. I need to take my legs. I need 4 legs out of there that are 1.5 inches wide. I'll show you how to do those on the table saw. And then our trim pieces over here, we're going to cut those down to 2 inches a piece. So I'm going to get the table saw out and we'll go over how to cut these pieces. Now we're going to straighten our side pieces out here, and basically our legs, everything's going to be sort of the same way. We're getting a nice flat edge to start with because you can almost visibly see that that's got a really jagged edge on it. So what I need to do is rip that edge off. So I'm going to set my saw where the blade just barely comes through the material. Once I do that, we need to get a straight edge. So you can use an I-beam level. I got this is like a Du Bois off of Amazon. I'll put the link in the description. And basically we're going to slide this up against our fence. Now what this does is that keeps the board from following the blade and creating the same exact warp we've got. By putting a good solid edge on both sides, we can get rid of that gap in the middle because it's going to stay straight and not work its way along that groove. I'm going to set this up so I basically just take off the very edge of this. I just want a nice straight line. So I'm going to slide this through along with the board at the same time. Now safety wise, use your own discretion. If you don't feel comfortable putting your hand near the saw blade, don't do it. Use a push stick. When you see I get down to the smaller pieces, I'm going to use a push stick. The camera angle is kind of deceiving, so my hand is a lot farther away from the blade than the camera angle is going to show you. Just in case anyone's concerned about my fingertips, besides me and my wife. Again, when I do this, we're going to push this and the board through at the same exact time together. Now again, what that did was leave me a nice flat clean surface so I can rip all my pieces off against my fence now without having any problems. Again, if you're running along this way, even though you're wider here, you've still got this gap right here. Your blade can push in as you get towards the end and create the same pattern on here. So get a nice clean edge before you start. So I'm going to take that and do that to all these and all those that I've got cut already. So I'm down on my 2x where I'm ready to rip it off. And when you rip off the edge of your 2x, If you've got good clean 2x, this one's not so pretty on the side edge. If you've got a nice smooth clean board, when you rip this off, if you consider ripping off a little bit more than just the rounded over edge, you can actually take these little strips and end up with leftover pieces that you can make little crates and stuff out of. I'll cut this one to show you what I mean. So what you end up with is this nice little rounded over edge piece. It's thick enough to make little crates with them. And if you're ripping down a bunch of these, you can actually just use all your scraps and make a crate out of your scrap material. Depends on how big of a pack rat you are, but it's the same thing you buy at Lowe's, box stores, Michael's, places like that. You pay 16, 20 bucks for one of these. That's just scrap wood cut off the end of those. Now, since my blade's already set up to cut 1.5 thick boards, I'm going to set it up to cut 1.5 thick wide because I want my legs to be the same width. Now, if this was a finished piece, I wouldn't do this straight up. I would try to sand this down or make it look better, but since this is going to be inside of our other planking, you're not going to see it. I'm going to adjust this by putting my board sideways. I've got my nice flat edge already. I'm going to slide my fence up to the blade. I'm actually going to put a little bit of pressure on it, and I'm going to just wiggle this up slightly. And I should be able to drop this in and out and slide it back and forth, lock my fence down. And when I cut this way now, my width will be the exact same as my thickness versus a couple little burrs. Again, I didn't finish this, but it will be close enough for what we're doing here. So I get my thickness the same as my width. 4 legs. So my next step is to get all my 5-inch pieces off for my fronts and my sides, my panels, my planks, whatever you want to call them. Make sure all your cut edges are facing the right direction, so when you go to cut them, you're actually using your nice smooth side against your fence and not your rough side against the fence. So I try to put all mine in a nice evenly order. I've still got my trim pieces sitting over here, so I don't cut them by mistake, because those need to be 2 inches. This needs to be 5 inches. So again, I'm going to lower my blade back down. Don't need it that high. Set my fence to 5. Now you can set yours, again, if your building is different, set it to whatever width you want, but in my case, I'm doing 5 inches. Doesn't have to be perfect. Again, this is just an outdoor decorational piece, but get as close as you want to be perfect. Now we don't need our flat bar anymore because we've got a nice smooth side. I've got that set to 5 inches. I'm going to run all these through real quick. So these are my trim pieces. This is what's going to go down the front of the planter, just to make it look like it's not made out with a 2x4 underneath of it. So again, I'm making mine 2 inches wide. You can do 1.5 inches, you can do 3 inches, whatever floats your boat. These boards are 5 and 3/4 inches wide, so technically you could do a 2.5 inch board out of one plank. So I got my fence set to 2 inches. I need 8 of these total. So out of those, you'll see we have some decent little pieces here. These are, I guess, around 1.5 inches wide, 1.25 to 1.5. We're going to use these for our cleats to hold our plant shelf in the bottom. So don't throw these away, save these. So another tip that may help you, I did this a lot when I was first building stuff, or if I still build something really complicated and I've got a bunch of cut pieces, take a piece of tape and write down whatever reminds you of what each piece is. So like on these, I wrote cleats, trim pieces, legs. On these, since they look almost identical, this is 13 inches, this is 14 inches. That way when I go to grab all my pieces and put them together, I don't have to search and sort. Everything's kind of organized as you go. It just makes assembly go a whole lot easier. So speaking of assembly, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make our sides first. We're not going to make our front and back, we're going to do the sides. So we're going to take our legs, 2 legs out, 13 inch or our smaller panels for the sides. And we're just going to kind of basically fit these in like a puzzle for now, just so you can get an idea of what you're looking at. If you've got a batter piece of wood, if you got a worse piece of wood, flip it inward. It's all the way on the corner edge here. We're going to cover this corner edge with a piece of trim, so it doesn't matter, but if you want to cover it, or if it's in the middle, turn your worst wood inward. So basically our two side panels are going to look like this. We're going to take our trim pieces though and attach them to the face. So when we're done, we're going to end up with a nice finished look like this on the outside. Again, yes, you can do this different ways. There's tons of different ways to do it. This is just a fast, easy, beginner, don't have a lot of tools, don't want to make a lot of fancy cuts, ways of getting this done. So after I got my two sides together, I've still got my pieces for my front and my cleats and stuff over there. So after I get this laid out, what I want to do is I just want to set these aside. So there's my panels, my trim pieces, my legs. Okay, so I've got everything apart here. I'm going to put it together. I'm going to put this together with brad nails and outdoor wood glue. Now, screws will hold this together bigger, tighter, stronger. I'm going to use screws on my cleats on the bottom, and I'll put screws, at least 2 or 3, in the face of this. Now, I'm going to paint this, so it's not going to look as bad. If you were going to stain it, you might do something different. You can also use brad nails. Now, the brad nails aren't going to show up as much, but the brad nails, I haven't found any outdoor pressure-treated brad nails anywhere, so the brad nails are going to rot eventually. But the wood glue should hold it together. All right, so what I did is I set up a temporary fence on my table here. Just took a clamp, a nice straight piece of wood. I slid my leg, or one of my 2 legs, up against that. Took my other leg and just kind of put it in position to hold the weight or keep this from falling over. I'm gonna take my plank and I'm gonna slide it up against here and flush it on the top and flush it up against this. That'll make it fast and easy for me to drop my planks in place, and I'm nice and square all the way down there without having to do any extra work. So again, I'm going to run a bead of glue down there. I'm going to brad nail those in place, just 2 or 3 brad nails in each one. And then I'm going to flip it around and repeat this for this panel and this panel. I'm using a Tight Bond 3 for this. Don't have to, you can use whatever glue you want. Again, I'm going to slide that against my fence so it's nice and flush. Take this board, just set it for reference. Put my excess glue on there. Find the better side. Lay this on top. Again, just kind of line that up to where it's close. Flush my side. Flush my top. You can use a square, your finger, whatever you want to. And then again, just a couple brads to keep it from moving and help while the glue sets. Make sure your brads aren't going where your screws are going to go. That side's done. I'm gonna take it. Do the same thing. I'm gonna glue this up. Now again, when we go to put the face panels on here, like that, you could do the same thing. You could brad nail those on and be done. Again, depending on where you're putting it at, your choice. I may end up brad nailing these after it's all said and done anyhow. So now we got our 2 sides done, we're ready to put our front boards on. We're gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna slide this up against my fence just so I got a reference, keeps it from falling over. I'm gonna line these boards up just like I did the other ones. I'm gonna set this to where it's close enough that it catches the board. And again, we're just gonna take these, glue them, and shoot them in. And try to, they should line up with the boards underneath of them. But I'm gonna take my fingers and just line them up so they're nice and square. Now you can glue one side, you can glue both sides, whatever you prefer. I prefer just kind of do them one at a time. That way I don't screw anything up or mess anything up, or glue doesn't dry, or if I get a phone call or something, I'm not trying to rush to get through any of this. Make sure your fingers are out of the way of your brads. It looks like my fingers are under, but they're going straight down. They're not underneath that board. They're going out that way. So don't shoot a brad through your finger. And you can nail these, you can pin nail them, again you can screw them, you can attach these however you want to, whatever works for you. I just happen to have a brad nailer, it's convenient and it's fast and easy. And again, they don't have to be 100% perfect, I'm just getting it as close as I can. It's the way I am. If you have to make small adjustments, like this leg will still move, so if it moves on you a little bit, like mine just moved a tiny bit, I can go ahead and re-flush this out before I put my next ones in. And if it keeps on walking on you, if you put your lower screw or nail in first, it'll keep that board from walking later on you. So we've got a 3-sided box, roll it over, finish the last side. I'm gonna glue this up. If you catch a glimpse of me on the video and I'm sweating and dripping all over everything, I apologize. It's probably 88 degrees and like 75% humidity today, so it's toasty, and I can't do a video with the air conditioner on, so I'm sacrificing my comfort for your entertainment. So hopefully everyone watches this and clicks on the like button for me. Now when you're putting your last piece in the top, so this is my far corner, I'm gonna have to push and pull at the same time on this. You can probably get a clamp if you needed to and clamp it in place. Again, this doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but you wanna make sure your corner is as straight as possible, so when you put your trim on, your trim doesn't stand out or look bad. Once you get one nail in it, do your other corner. Make sure it's even, lined up. Make sure all your boards are pushed tight together, because normally you're coming down through this way. This you're gonna have to push up on that board a little bit. Once you get them lined up, again, fingers are out of the way. So there's our square. So we're getting down to the last few pieces here. Trim. Basically this is gonna go on top of this, and we're gonna line it up down the edge and put this around all four sides. Now what this should do, when you're looking at the front of it, you shouldn't see the leg that's hidden underneath here. Now again, you can make this a little bit wider if you're afraid you're going to see it. Most people aren't going to look under your planter anyhow, but if you want to make that look a little bit better, make this 2.5 inches wide or 2.25 inches wide. But I think once we set it up, you'll see there's no problem. Something else you can do, if you can make this 2.5 inches wide, you can miter this. You could actually 45 these so you get a nice mitered corner on here. Again, I'm not going to do that in this video because this is just kind of a beginner how to build it. The 45 miter takes a little bit, more skill, not a lot, but if you got a table saw, you can rip a 45 on it. Just getting your measurements right. And if you're not exactly a 45, one might be a 43, one might be a 47. So getting your angles is a little bit tougher. We'll worry about that in another video. So I went back and forth with my own brain there, deciding whether I wanted to glue this, whether I wanted to staple it, screw it, nail it. I'm just going to glue it and brad nail it. I think the brad nails will hold it in place long enough to keep it until the glue sets. I'm not putting the glue to the point where it squishes out, but it's definitely going to be a moist glue. So when I push it down, I might get a little squirt out, but it's not like a cutting board. I don't need it to squish out and run all over the place. I just want it to adhere everywhere. And again, I've gone over the edge. I don't need to, but you're not going to see it anyhow. I'm going to cover the whole surface, then not. And then I'm going to drop it on my board just like that, so I get glue all over my face. Like I said, I wasn't going to. Line my edge up, and then I'm just going to take my brad nail, or I'm going to brad nail these in. Now I remembered where I put my brads from before. You don't want your brads to hit your other brads. So I can see on my other side where I'm at. I'm just going to kind of go up a little bit more and pop these in. Like so. But this could be 2.5 inches wide instead of 2 inches, and that would cover your leg offset in here. Because again, our board's a 1/2 inch thick, board's 1.5 inches, 2 inches. Should have covered it, I thought, but I didn't think about this one. So 2.5 inches. So I'm going to overlap this and shoot it in place. So I'm ready to do the side now. The side is the 2 3/4 inch wide piece. So I'm going to put the 2 3/4 inches over it. And again, this just has to line up pretty good with the top. The bottom doesn't have to be perfect because again, we want our legs to stick down past our trim piece. Make sure when you're working your way around, you don't do what I almost just did. Remember your side pieces, you probably should do them first, but if not, put a piece of trim in there. That way when you go around to do them, you're actually lined up with the trim on the front. I almost shot that in there without looking. That might have been a disaster. Now, depending on how finished you want this, I don't really, again, this is going outdoors on the back porch. No one's ever going to look at it, consider it, criticize or anything like that. But if you end up with like a little pocket like that, like a little gap, again, I don't have all the nails and all the screws in here. I can pull that tight with a clamp and then just pop a couple more brads in. Again, depending on the finish you're looking for, You can make this as good or as bad as you want. You can go back through here and re-brad nail all these. You can toe nail them, you can screw them. Just give me the basic idea. So when you do these cleats, you can do them one of two ways. Well, you can do them several ways, but one of the two fast ways I'm going to show you. You can set the cleat so it flushes out on the bottom here, and when you put your shelving material in, you set it so it sits on top of it like that. Or you can set it up higher so your shelving material sits on the bottom. That gives you a little bit more depth in there versus raising it up a little bit. I'm going to do mine the latter. So I'm going to basically have mine, so I'll put my bottom shelf on the bottom instead of up in, dropped in from the top. So I'm going to use 1-inch screws, and I'm going to pre-drill these also. I want to make sure I glue this, and I want to actually put screws in here because if I use a brad nail, it's not going to be as strong, and the brad nail is also going to shoot through the other side. Even if I use like a 1-inch brad nail, the brad nail is most likely just, the material is so soft it's just going to shoot right through it. So I'm taking my piece of extra scrap right here, and I'm lining my cleat up so it lines up evenly. Now once I get that in place, you can either take a clamp it down, which I'm going to do, or you can just hold it and pre-drill it. I'm just putting my clamp on my outside board. I'm not actually clamping my cleat. I'm just clamping this board, and then I'll put pressure on the cleat when I put the pre-drills in it. Now make sure if you're not good at pre-drilling, don't drill through the bottom of your board. You just want to drill through it. I'm not going to countersink these, and I don't want to drill through the outside. So if you have to put a piece of tape, or if you've got a stop bit, use that so you don't go through the other side. And once I get a couple in there, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple screws in there. And that way my board doesn't move on me. Again, don't over tighten them. Don't draw them to where they go all the way through the board. 1-inch screws, and the board material thickness is about 1 inch. So once it goes in, stop, because you don't want to come out through the other side. Do that on both sides. Work your way across 3, 4, 5 screws, whatever you feel comfortable with. One more thing, if you're going to full bottom this, or if you're going to put more weight in it, you can also put cleats on both sides also, and you can put a full bottom in this if you wanted to, if you were making a box or something. But again, for what my purposes are here, this is going to hold everything I need just fine. So once you have your cleats in place, take a couple of extra pieces of scrap wood, or cut another piece of board off if you want. Measure them. Again, you can do 2 of these, 3 of these, 4 of these, 5 of these, however many you want. You can plate in the whole bottom. I'm going to use 2 for mine just for demonstration purposes. And again, if you put your cleat in the other way, you can drop these in from the top. Dropping in from the top lets you put more weight on the surface, but again, you lose the depth of the box. So I'm going to spin mine over this way. I'm going to pre-drill it, and I'm going to put a couple screws in there. Now when I drill these, I don't want to go straight down into that board. I'm actually going to go back in at an angle. Like that. And that'll let my screw bite in better, and that way I know for a fact I'm hitting the middle of my board. I'm getting the most support. And since I'm only using screws, and I'm only using the bottom plates, I want to be in there as snug as possible. And there's our boards for the bottom. And again, you can see they're secure enough. I can hold the weight of the board up. Again, I'm putting a lightweight speaker inside of mine instead of a plant. So you can do yours however you want to support. Let's do the top trim. So we're ready to do our top trim. Now if you watch my other planter video, I'll show you how to make 45-inch miters on these corners. Since this one we're keeping it simple, I'm going to make these just square edge corners. We're just going to square them off and it'll look okay. It's not going to look as good a miter corner, but it's a lot easier to do. So I wanted to make sure I figure out what my width is. So I'm 15 inches, just a hair over 15 inches. I want a 1/2 inch overhang, so I'm going to make the outside or the front board 16 inches. So I need 2 boards at 16 inches. Now, if you want to try to cover up this entire 1.5 inch leg in here, you're going to have to make your board 3 inches wide. I'm going to go with like a 2 1/4 inch board because I can get 2 out of each plank, or 2 out of each width plank. And I'm not too worried about seeing this edge in here. You can always trim it off if you wanted to with a saw. Or once you put your plane in here, it's going to cover it up anyhow, so you're not going to notice it. So So what you're going to end up with is a piece going across this way overhanging and a piece going this way overhanging. So on the inside, you may see a little bit of that square there, but again, depending on how much perfectionist you are, how good you are, if you're just new to doing this, learn how to build them square first and then start adding mitered 45s and fancy stuff later on. So again, back to the saw, I've got my two 16-inch boards here. I'm going to flank my edge off or cut my edge off, and again, I'm going to make these about 2 1/4 inches wide. So I cut all 4 of these at the same time, so my width would be the same. 2 of them are going to go on the front and the back. Well, 1 on the front, 1 on the back, and 2 of them are going to go on the sides. Once I get the front and the back in place, I'll cut the sides to make them fit in, or I'll work my way around, whichever works. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to line it up. I'm going to measure it using a board here, so I'm a 1/2 inch thick board. I can flatten my panel out that way. And same thing on the sides. Again, this does not have to be 100% perfect, it just has to match on both sides when you do it. So however you feel comfortable about doing that. And when you go to cut these pieces, it's really easy to cut too much wood off. So I'm going to measure this out. I'm going to cut it longer than it needs to be. I'm going to go back to the saw probably 3 or 4 times and just snake this up to where it barely fits in there. I'll take my pencil and I'm going to line this up in here. We'll make a mark right here. It should be right where that line is, but again, I'm going to come on the outside of that and cut a little bit wider than it needs to be. I'm only going to cut one side at a time. So there's attempt 1. You can see just a 1/2 a width of the saw blade. So attempt number 3, and I'm in. Again, repeat that for the other side, and your top will be done. So that's your finished build. So that's your rough structure. You can sand this, paint it, do whatever you want to with it. Now the reason I made mine so deep is this outdoor speaker is actually going to go in the bottom of mine. So I'm going to take my bottom cleats back off, that's why I didn't glue them. Put the speaker in place, and I'm going to make a faux shelf up above that, and that way I can drop my planter on top of it. But the speaker will be on the bottom facing downward and out. So outdoors it's just going to look like a planter sitting there with music coming out of it instead of a rock or something silly outside. So one last thing you can do with these too, if you want, you can take extra boards and you can trim this out however you want. So you could put fancy little crosses in here. You could paint your initial on the front. I'm going to start by spraying this one black, but again, you can put trim on this and make it look as fancy as you want to. That's the good solid foundation for you though.